If you're watching this video, you probably have a boss or have had a boss at some point in your life. And you've probably had to ask something of them at some point, either to recognize your value, for a promotion, or a possible salary bump, or just to ask for a favor in any context. Now the key is, are there specific persuasion weapons that you can use to just brainwash them into wanting to help you? There definitely are. Let's take a look at some. Now, the techniques that people use in everyday life to appeal to their bosses vary greatly, from just flattery to pure intimidation and anything in between, some being more sophisticated than others. What we're going to cover, however, are 5 super specific persuasion techniques to convince your boss in this situation. The first thing that you should do is to figure out what is their influence archetype. So usually there are 4 distinct personality types in someone. Either they're fast or slow, either they're emotional or logical. And those 4 combinations result in super specific personality types that can be persuaded in specific ways. For example, if you're emotional and fast, you are what I call a passionate. You are convinced by celebration, inspiration, being a reference to others, partying, and celebrating. If you are emotional and slow, you are what I call a nurturer. You are persuaded by people helping you, by you helping others, by them holding your hand, and allowing you to really influence others. If you are slow and logical, you are what I call an analyst. You are persuaded by facts, numbers, processes, reputation, and credentials. And finally, if you are fast and logical, you are a dominant. You only want to win, and you are persuaded by having victories and subjugating others. And these 4 types are important because you can persuade your boss better if you know what is their personality type. For example, if they're passionate, just pitch whatever you're asking as them being an inspiration to others or being a reference to other people, so others are looking up to them for inspiration. If they're an analyst, for example, you have to show some kind of numbers or some kind of facts. And if you don't have those numbers, at least show replicable processes or credentials that make the thing seem legitimate. I covered these 4 types in more detail in multiple videos and courses, but the gist of it is you have to figure out which type is your boss's predominant type. And if you can tailor your language to their type, you are going to persuade them in a much more effective way. The second tip is to create a kind of bilateral code of conduct. That is, you are explicit about what they demand from you, but also from what you demand from them. It's saying something like, boss, I know that as an employee, this is what you demand from me. Quality work, being on time, honoring the company, whatever it is. You probably know of much more specific details than I do for your case. But then you say, hey, respectfully, I think that I can also have some demands of you as my boss. To value my work, to support my initiatives, to do whatever it is that you currently need for that favor. So what you're effectively doing is you're binding the 2 of you together in a relationship. And you're saying, this is what I bring to the table, and you have the right to demand that of me. But this is what you have to bring to the table, and I have the right to demand that from you. The third tip is to break the frame and to speak as equals. What I mean by this is the following. Bosses benefit from what I call contextual power. And this is something that you see in many other situations, such as, for example, a teacher that has a lot of power in the classroom because they're the teacher, or the doctor in a consultation who has a lot of power because you are coming to them. In these situations, even if the person is not necessarily right, they have more power due to the context. And bosses are perfect at leveraging this. So what you want to do is you want to break that frame, and you do it by asking permission to break it. You say something like, hey, can we just put the whole boss-employee thing aside for a second, and can we just speak person to person? And if possible, even calling them by their first name when doing this. This is a very efficient persuasion technique because they're always going to say yes. There's not going to be any situation where they tell you, you don't have the permission to speak to me human to human. And the interesting thing is that by agreeing to do this, they are taking the power away from themselves. They're moving from a frame where they control the frame and they have contextual power to another one where the scales are balanced and you're just 2 people speaking to each other. So this allows you to make more demands and to truly treat them as equals, putting the power aside. It's almost like you're saying, I'm not going to fight your power, I'm just going to ask you to put your power aside and I'm going to speak with you with the same amount of power. Then, tip number 4, one that I frequently mention, is to get their opinion on something. That is, instead of telling them what you want them to do, ask them how they would do it. Again, this is the principle of implementation intention. The more that the person visualizes how to do something, the more that they're likely to do it. Just picture the difference between asking someone, are you going to promote me, yes or no? Or asking them, how would you promote me? Would you speak with HR first? What would be the time frame? What would you do? What type of email would you send? What would you include in the text? What do you consider are my strengths and my weaknesses? And so on. It's a completely different situation. By asking for their opinion, you are forcing them to make a plan to do you that favor themselves. You're not telling them what to do, you're asking them to tell themselves what they would do. So this has the double benefit of both making it more concrete in their mind, so they're more likely to do it, but also they retain control. That is, if they are the ones that come up with that initiative, they're more likely to do it than if somebody else is telling them to do it. Remember the IKEA effect. You are going to value more a piece of furniture if you've built it yourself rather than someone else building it and delivering it to you. And that same thing applies not just to furniture, but any kind of object, any kind of idea, or any kind of initiative. If they are the ones who are creating it, they're much more likely to like it and to actually implement it. And finally, you want to obtain some sort of commitment, because if you don't, then this conversation is pretty much useless. You want to do what I call intent labeling. That is, you force the person to state in the first person what they're going to do. I am going to speak to HR. I am going to promote you. I am going to support this. This may sound ridiculous, but in many cases, you want to ask your boss to specifically state in the first person, I am going to do this. This has to do with being active versus being reactive. By this, I mean the following. If you ask someone, are you going to do this, yes or no? And they tell you yes, it's reactive. They may say yes just to finish the conversation or to close the topic. They're not taking the initiative to say that they're going to do something. But if you ask them to state in the first person, I am going to do this, it's a completely different level of power. And you also benefit from consistency bias. That is, once someone says in the first person, I am going to do this, they're much more likely to not contradict themselves because they don't want to go back on their word. And by the way, if you have difficulty in getting them to state that in the first person, it's probably because they don't want to do it. So if you ask your boss, are you going to talk about me and sing my praises at the next promotion meeting? And they say yes, that's reactive. But then if you ask them, can you state in the first person, I am going to present your case, and they don't say it, that's a bad signal. So these are our 5 tips to brainwash your boss into helping you. First, figure out their influence archetype. That is, are they emotional or logical? And are they fast or slow? And then tailor your communication to their specific personality type. Tip number 2, be explicit about what you demand from them. Many employees think that the boss only demands things from them, but you can demand things from your boss as well. So balance the scales and make it clear that both sides have demands of each other. Tip number 3, break their frame and speak as equals. Don't let them have power just because they're in that position. Ask to speak human to human, and the scales are balanced. Then, tip number 4 is to ask for their opinion. Remember, if they take the initiative to propose something versus you proposing something and forcing it on them, they're much more likely to actually implement it. And tip number 5, intent labeling. Get them to state something in the first person. I agree to this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to defend you in this meeting, and so on. And unless you obtain a commitment in the first person, it's very likely that they're just saying things and they're not really committed to doing anything. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out the channel for more negotiation and communication techniques. Thank you so much for watching.